I did a second brew day on the Breweasy, and I get contacted by people all the time asking me about changing different parameters. As you know, in the first brew day, we maxed out the basket and had some efficiency deficiencies, if you will. And so people reach out to me all the time about changing different variables to adjust things, and I always tell them, change one thing at a time. Well, I didn't do that on my second brew day. So I wanted to brew something that was a little bit more for me, and I've been brewing a lot of brown ales, stouts, all that kind of stuff. So I wanted to finally get back to brewing an IPA. And so I formulated a recipe and came up with Total Eclipse of the Citra. Now I'm using some hops that were sent to me by Yakima Valley, the Lupo Max Citra, as well as the Eclipse hops. Also shout out to Yakima Valley. They do sponsor the online brew club that I'm part of, Brewtubers. So thank you very much, Yakima, for that. And also thank you for sending me the hops to use on this brew. Now, my first problem that I had with the brew day was that when I formulated the recipe, I had calculated for 5.5 gallons in the kettle, not 5.5 gallons in the fermenter. So that was my first issue, but we'll progress from there. So it was about 5.7 gallons of water for the brew day. The other variable that I changed was I decided to do a 1 gallon sparge, which was something that the engineer over at Blichmann had suggested that I try. So I went ahead and calculated my recipe to do a 1 gallon sparge, filled up the kettle, got it heated up to 161 degrees, mashed in on it. Now this time it was about 15 pounds of grain. I can't remember exactly. I'll put the amount of grain down here below. And so it was a little bit lighter recipe. The last time I did 18 pounds of grain. So I had a little bit of flaked adjuncts in there, but not much really. I wanted to kind of straddle the lines between an IPA and a New England IPA. So mashed in on the beer and didn't have really too many issues mashing in like I did last time. I was able to stir everything in. The mash was a little bit thick, but it wasn't really too much of a problem. One of the things that I also did, which was a change from the original, I actually added a T into the recirculation system. I jettisoned or did away with the flow gauge and asked Blichmann to send me another linear flow valve, a tri-clamp linear flow valve. So I've got 3 of those in the system, one on the outlet of the kettle, one on the whirlpool, and then one on the recirculation port going back into the kettle. So what I did was I hooked up a T so that I could recirculate around the basket as well as recirculate into the basket all at the same time and kind of control the flow on all of those with the linear flow valves. So that was kind of the Frankenstein system that I came up with for that. So got everything mashed in and then put the recirculation tube down in there and all that stuff and started the recirculation. One of the things I noticed right away with the recirculation was that one of the holes was really near the top of the mash. And one of the ways I would suggest, if you have that situation with the brewing system, I did get another piece of tubing a little bit later on in the video and actually slide it up over top of the tube so you can actually cover some of those holes. So it wasn't really too big of a deal when doing the mash, but I did notice that the mash, it was kind of, bubbling up in there a little bit like it was before, but even more so this time. And as I was mashing in, when I was recirculating around, it seemed like the outer parts of the mash were a little bit wetter, which was, ideal from what I experienced before. So, just let it mash. About 10 minutes in, I checked the pH, and unfortunately, the Brewfather calculation that I had was a little bit off, so I actually added too much lactic acid in, so I had to add a little bit of sodium bicarbonate or baking soda in there, and I mean, it was just a little bit of a pinch, and waited a few minutes, took another reading, and I was at 5.2. So just progressed on with that. And I noticed as I mashed, I kept, taking an eye on it, checking on it periodically. And I started to see that basically, it was recirculating in the entire basket. I could see grain flowing around everywhere. Didn't really look like I was having any issues with like channeling or anything like that because, it's a complete grain basket, the fully mashed basket. So there wasn't any issue with that. So, went through the mash. And then at the end of the mash, I was pretty surprised really because I got a nice clear result on the mash. And so, there was no issue with that at all. Pulled the recirculation arm out, pulled the basket up to do the draining and then also the sparging. Now, I did a cold sparge on this. Also, it was a 45-minute mash, so it was a little bit of abbreviated mash. And then I did a cold sparge on it where I just got some RO water in a pitcher and just kind of poured it over. It was probably less than the ideal way to do that, because I did notice as I was kind of pouring around the outside that some of the liquid was kind of pouring out of the basket, which really wasn't rinsing the grains very much. So I don't know if I really like that method or not with a complete mesh basket, but I went ahead and tried it anyways just to see what would happen. So after I got done with that, I did the smashing of the mash or the grain bill, just like I did before, and wound up with just under 6 gallons, which was what the Brewfather software had calculated that I would get. And then I was just on my gravity, according to Brewfather, I had the efficiency set at 70% on the batch, and I was just under by a couple of points. Took a reading with the Anton Par device. That's something that I just got recently as well, and I'll be doing a full review on that. I just wanted to use it for this and see how accurate everything was, and take some measurements as I went throughout the brew day. One of the other things that someone had asked me after the initial brew video came out was about the chiller getting clogged. And I thought initially that it wasn't clogged at all, but I just because I dumped the pellets into the kettle on the last brew day. And I did find out after doing a back flush of the chiller that it did get clogged with hops. So I kind of came up with a different strategy this time. And I had a first wort hop edition, so I added that into a hop spider. I had it hanging on the side, and then I decided what I wanted to do was I wanted to put it in the center of the kettle, and then what would happen was I would use the recirculation arm again to recirculate through a big 4-ounce whirlpool edition, or flame out charge of hops at the end. So I wanted to do that. So I moved the spider to the center, and then I wound up putting the recirculation arm in there. Did a 30-minute boil again, which, man, I tell you what, I really enjoyed doing the 45-minute mash and the 30-minute brew day. I mean, it just seemed like the brew day went so fast. So at the end of the boil, I ran, the wort through the chiller and all that stuff, and got everything, sanitized and all that. And then chilled everything down to 170 after the 30 minutes was over, and then began my whirlpool for 10 minutes. Dumped the hops into the spider, and then used the recirculation arm and the 2 valves to do a whirlpool, as well as do a recirculation in the hop spider itself. And that worked pretty good, but one of the things that I did notice, and I've had this issue before with using hop spiders or even hop socks or whatever, they do tend to kind of clog up a little bit. So I wasn't able to get a really good recirculation through the hop spider at all. I did wind up having to stir it pretty good with my mash paddle in order to get it to kind of circulate through there. I just had to watch the flow, and I could try to turn it up a little bit, and then it was wanting to overflow, so I had to turn it back down. But as far as everything goes with that, it came out pretty good. No issues, didn't overflow it or anything like that. After the whirlpool was over, then chilled it the rest of the way down to about 65 degrees. I'm doing a kind of a split fermentation method with this. I'm going to be using the Verdant IPA yeast, and I'm going to be doing partially unpressurized, and then after the first couple of days, I'm going to put it under pressure. I did that before, and it turned out really well with this particular yeast, so I'm doing kind of a split fermentation there with that. So once I got everything chilled down, I did take a look at what my volume was, and I was just a little bit, I was right at 5.5 gallons. So I was a little bit perplexed by that, because I was wondering if my boil off was incorrect or whatever. But it actually turned out, because of how I set up the recipe, that the recipe called for 4.85 gallons in the fermenter. So I wound up right around that amount in the fermenter. And as far as the gravity goes, I was just actually a point over on my gravity. So everything turned out pretty much, I had a 70% efficiency set. The mash efficiency was a little bit low. I think it was about 68%. But as far as the total efficiency and, hitting the numbers of the brew day, everything came through pretty much dead on. So no issues with that. One other thing that I did on it that was kind of interesting was I didn't want to lose too much to the chiller, because I felt like I was already going to be a little bit low on my volume anyway. So I kind of did a technique, and this is not the technique that I thought up. I actually saw Bradley over at Portly Gentleman do this first. So I took the tri-clamp from the outlet of the kettle and put a male flare to 1.5-inch tri-clamp adapter on it. And then I actually just pushed CO2 through the pump, through all the hoses, through the chiller and everything, and I got whatever was left in there. And I think that's actually what got me to that final volume that I had. Someone did ask me about cleaning on the unit as well from before in the first video. The basket is pretty easy to clean, pretty much dump out the grains. I usually like smack on the steel bands that go around the basket to kind of knock some of the grain out of there. And then it's just a matter of, you know, spraying everything off. I've got a sprayer in the sink, so it makes it a little bit easy. And then as far as cleaning the coil, there, you know, there's a lot of questions about cleaning the Blichmann boil coil. And what I do is I'll put probably about 3 or 3 gallons, enough to cover the sensor, in the kettle. And then I'll use a brewery wash. And in this video, or in this particular cleaning session, I'm using some from Exchillerator. They have a brewery wash. So far, it's been really awesome in my experience. It's worked really well. So if you're looking for a brewery wash, be sure to check that out. I'll leave a link down in the description below. So what I'll do is I'll heat it up to about 170 degrees, let it go for about 10 or 15 minutes. I kind of did a whirlpool with it. I let everything recirculate through the entire system, the pump, the chiller, all that stuff. After I'm done with that, I'll just turn off the heat, and then I'll use a bottle brush, or like a bottling brush, and basically just swirl around and scrub the element. And you can get in between all of the coils and at the bottom and everything. And I mean, it comes out sparkling clean. Here's some footage of it right after I got done doing the scrubbing and just drained the kettle. I haven't even done a rinse on it yet. So it looks pretty clean, as you can see, and I didn't have any issues with cleaning it at all. So that's, kind of how I'm cleaning the system and how everything works. Overall, the second brew day went really well. But in spite of me changing all of these variables and trying all this new stuff, which, I couldn't help myself. I just had to do it, despite my advice to lots of you out there not to change things over and over again. When I do another brew day on this, I'll probably follow the same techniques again, just to see how everything goes. But overall, the second brew day went very well. I mean, hit all the numbers. I'm happy. 70% efficiency approximately, brew house. I'm happy with that. I can't complain at all. Everything worked fine. I did enjoy all of the valves to be able to do a recirculation around the basket and recirculate through the grain. So, leave me a comment down below. Let me know what you think of the second brew day and all the changes that I made. This has been Brian for Short Circuited Brewers. We'll see you on the next video.